O-Zone.
Welcome to the O-Zone Podcast with Jaguars senior writer John Oehser.
All right, welcome to this week's O-Zone Podcast. And I'm joined this week by Matt Miller of ESPN. I think most people who cover the draft and follow this recognize you. Fourth year at ESPN.
Yes, sir. After
time goes quick, man.
10 years at Bleacher Report, 4 at ESPN, and now I feel really old. Haven't put that math together.
Well, you're not old. I know that because I'm old. So, first question, tell me about this year's draft. You cover it from a broad perspective. You work on it year-round. Give me maybe 2 or 3 defining characteristics of this draft as you think about it.
This is an offensive line, defensive line draft. It's about the line of scrimmage, really. Okay. The defensive tackle group, the deepest I maybe ever seen.
Okay.
We're going to see 30 guys in this draft just at defensive tackle. We might see 30 guys at defensive end and defensive tackle in the top 4 rounds. So it's really deep there. It's a good offensive line class. A lot of tackles who may end up being guards in the NFL. Right. But I think we'll see, 7 or 8 first-round players on the offensive line. So this is your round 1. It's going to be dominated by the trenches, but it's a good running back class. It's a good tight end class as well.
And it seems the Jaguars, in many people's opinion, need line on both sides. When you say it goes deep, if you get a guy in the 4th round, is that immediate impact? Is that long-term? How would you describe maybe that middle round? Because you assume the first couple of guys are going to be able to play, but this team needs contributions deep.
I think this is a year where you can find those contributions in round 4, round 5, especially at defensive tackle. It's more about like your scheme, right? Like there are going to be nose tackles in rounds 4 and 5 who can come in and start right away. You know, the premier 3 techniques, the 6 technique defensive ends, they're going to come off the board much earlier because of that pass rush ability, but you're always able to like unearth some guys. You know, players slip through the cracks or guys develop, once they get drafted. So it is a good year to have those early day 3 picks. I think that's kind of where the drop-off in this draft class happens is round 5 is where you probably hit the floor, unlike last year.
So that's a deep draft, right?
Yeah. Last year was, really, really deep as well. But this is another good year, especially in those middle rounds.
Gotcha. James Gladstone on with the Jaguars as the new general manager. Liam Cohen is new head coach. We'll stick to maybe what the Rams do historically because that's where James Gladstone comes from. For Jaguars fans who are going to be watching this, who are draftniks, who sort of get into it close to the level you do, what should they be watching for and what has defined Los Angeles philosophically? Yeah,
the days of not having first-round picks in Los Angeles is gone, right? They went away from that. And I think the philosophy that I picked up from the Rams the last couple of drafts is they're drafting players who were highly productive at major universities and could get on the field right away. So under Trent Baalke, Jaguar fans will remember, it was all about traits. It was all about arm length, speed, things like so it was very traits-based scouting. And I think with Gladstone, what you're going to see is traits still matter, of course, but production matters as much as that.
Okay.
So like with the Rams this past year, they take Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, their first 2 picks. Highly productive guys from one of the best defenses in college football when they came out from Florida State, and they were able to get on the field and play right away. And I think that type of philosophy of you want day 1 impact players.
Right.
So the days of betting on even this example, like Travon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson, that would not happen with Gladstone as general manager because you're taking the guy that, hey, I've been watching him for 3 years produce at Michigan. We feel confident he's going to continue to do that in the NFL as opposed to, and Travon's been a good player, right? But I think everyone would agree he was drafted on the upside and the traits instead of the proven ability.
Now, the opposite way of that, because many teams go the other way and have success. To the average person, well, of course you would take the most productive guy. But teams also, there is a school of thought the other way as well.
There absolutely is. It's where, the projection side of it is huge. And teams will look at a player and say, okay, well, once we get him in our system and once we get him around our coaches, just think of the possibilities, right? It's almost like a Christmas present on Christmas morning. You can't wait to open it and see what it is, right? But my experience, and this is something in my own philosophy I've been working on the last couple of years, is how often do those players hit? Like, what is the hit rate when you draft for measurables over production. And I think it's kind of sweeping the NFL right now a little bit too, with the Rams' success, with the Eagles having so much success. This is something the Ravens have done forever.
Right.
Is they just draft highly productive, really good football players.
And I'm curious about the approach of the Eagles, for example. They won the Super Bowl, so usually it's a monkey see, monkey do league. They have historically gone line, and then productive skill players. Do you see that being a trend? Do you see teams following that model?
I do. I think, and especially in this draft, because where this draft is so strong on the line of scrimmage, I think we'll see teams go to that model.
Okay.
And also, especially, those front offices are now, breeding the next GMs and area scouts and things like that. And so I think we'll see that philosophy spread to some degree of, hey, let's invest in the trenches. Let's build teams almost from the inside out. Make sure you have the quarterback, obviously. But then once you have the quarterback, let's build up the line of scrimmage, and then you can go add, some of the fun pieces like wide receiver and running back.
Does that take some willingness to not listen to Twitter when you do that?
Yeah, it definitely takes patience.
Yeah.
Too, right? Because everybody wants, the exciting new toy.
Sure.
Brian Thomas is a great pick. Everybody wants that every year, right? But sometimes it's taking the right guard, in the second round instead of another receiver or running back is the right move. And now I think there's proof in that to where you can point to Philadelphia and say, hey, look what they did. And even on the flip side, you could point to Kansas City and say, they needed a left tackle and they took a wide receiver. Now, wide receiver was really good, but didn't help him win a Super Bowl, even though he had 8 catches and 2 touchdowns.
And their Super Bowl losses have come when the line is struggled.
Exactly. So I think now you can, objectively point to successes and failures in the NFL and say, like, the Chiefs are a dynasty. They're 2 Super Bowl losses because they couldn't protect Mahomes.
Right.
And so that's where I think you would want to go back to that idea of let's resist the urge to get the shiny, fancy prospects. Let's build the line of scrimmage.
Tell me who you believe the Jaguars take at 5, but more importantly, sort of how the first 4 picks get there to make that happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll do a little mini mock draft,
sure.
Right? So I think 1, Abdul Carter, if the Titans keep the pick. 2, I'll say Cam Ward to the Browns. 3, Shedeur Sanders to the Giants. 4, Travis Hunter to the Patriots. So I would say Mason Graham, the defensive tackle
which
from
seems
Michigan.
to be, if you look at 80 mock drafts.
Yeah. Now, if Travis Hunter's there, take him, right? I know we've been saying line of scrimmage. Line of scrimmage. He's a different type of prospect, right? But Mason Graham would be fantastic. And I do think even connect the dots to Gladstone coming in as general manager, what they did last year with Braden Fisk especially. Mason Graham is just a little bit of an upgraded version of that. So you get your 3 technique, a guy who never loses on tape. Does he have 15 sacks a year? No, but he never loses.
Right.
And in that way, he's a lot like a guy like Quinnen Williams was coming out. He's a lot like Christian Wilkins was for the Miami Dolphins, or Matabuke with the Ravens, another type of guy who's had that type of success. So I think if Mason Graham's there and those 4 players are off the board, that's an easy pick for me.
A couple of thoughts there. Is Mason Graham the type, everything you're hearing at the Combine, maybe not the perfect physical specimen who's going to blow you away in the airport, but an absolute player on the field. So he absolutely fits what we're talking about, right?
A little bit short-armed.
Right.
He's not 6'5", 325 and going to run a 4.8. It's not who he is, but he is a dominant player. I mean, his ability to just disrupt what the offensive line wants to do is consistent. And again, I think sometimes when we watch football, it's like you want to see the impact plays. Well, sometimes it's the guy who's setting those impact plays up. And that was him consistently in Michigan. Michigan doesn't let their defensive linemen just pin their ears back and go a lot, which is why every year it feels like we have a Michigan first rounder on the D-line, and you look at their stats, and you're like, how's this guy a first-round pick? He didn't have, he's just a great player. So Graham would be one of those, foundational pieces. It's somebody that now you're able to build a team around it.
Now, you kind of picked up something that, has been discussed in different places I've been around the Combine. Travis Hunter, even for a team like the Jaguars that clearly not only needs line, but their higher-ups are talking about that being absolutely critical, yet along comes a guy who might make them wait for a round or a year to start addressing that.
Yeah, and he's different because he fills 2 needs at once.
Okay.
Because he can play corner and wide receiver, or however you see it, wide receiver and then some corner. I think that checking 2 boxes is what makes him such a unique player, to where you would maybe bypass. And I'll tell you, I have Mason Graham graded very closely to Travis Hunter. So, there would be some conflict there. What route do we go? If he happens to be on the board, what do we do? I think the good news for the Jags is he's probably not going to be on the board, so you have to have that conversation. And you can go back to the original plan of, and I've heard them talk about it as well, okay, we got to control line of scrimmage, we got to build the inside here.
Take me through just a couple of the defensive tackle, offensive line, or the top position groups. Maybe give me 2 or 3 guys at each spot that you like.
Yeah. So the defensive line group, I love Abdul Carter and Mason Graham. They're both in my top 3 players overall. So huge fans of what they do. I like Walter Nolan from Ole Miss a lot. I heard he won't be working out here. I'm a little bit bummed to not see that, but I'm a fan of his ability, especially if you're looking for a penetrator, somebody that can go get after the quarterback. He's a highly, highly athletic guy. On the offensive line, I think this class has been almost disrespected a little bit. It's a good class. Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks both started for 3 years in the SEC. They were week 1 starters as true freshmen. Kelvin Banks gave up 3 sacks in 3 years.
Okay.
That's fascinating to me. And he's not being talked about as, people say, well, he's not Joe Alt, he's not Penei Sewell. And he's a pretty good player. 3 sacks in 3 years. Going against Georgia twice this year, he only gave up 1 sack. I think it's the play everyone remembers, and it's kind of been held against him. But it is a good tackle class. I would throw Armand Mimbo from Missouri in there. He's a right tackle who might end up playing guard because he's a little bit under 6'4", but it is a good offensive line class.
How secondary is another area the Jaguars need. It feels like line is their priority, and they have to figure out how to address secondary. How does that work throughout the draft this year in terms of being able to find guys to contribute in the secondary as you move on maybe to round 3 and 4?
Yeah, it's not the deepest secondary draft. It's really not. I think at safety there's a little bit more depth in rounds 3 and round 4. Guys like Xavier Watts from Notre Dame potentially could be at the top of round 3. Andrew Makuba from Texas, Billy Bowman from Oklahoma. They're in that round 3, round 4 range. They could be rookie starters. They could be impact guys, especially at free safety. The corner class, it's not a deep corner.
Not there,
group.
right.
Trey Amos from Ole Miss, probably going to be a top of round 2 guy. Azariah Thomas from Florida State, probably going to be a top of round 2 guy. But there's a pretty significant drop-off after the 5th corner to where you're almost reaching a little bit.
Gotcha. Final question, because I could talk all day to you about the draft. Wide receiver, Brian Thomas Jr. is there, obviously. But it would be good for this offense to be able to pick up one more guy opposite him. Is that available in the draft round 2 or 3? Can you find a guy like that?
You absolutely can. I think finding complementary guys, that's where this wide receiver class is good.
Okay.
Maybe it doesn't have like last year with all the wide receiver 1 types, but there's a lot of good wide receiver 2 types in this class. Matthew Golden from Texas is probably going to be at the top of round 2. Round 3, there's 2 guys from Iowa State, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, both to be very good complementary players. Jalen Royals from Utah State would give you a little bit more athleticism underneath, a guy who can make things happen after the catch. He's got a really physical, strong lower body. He's going to give you, not to give fans PTSD, but kind of like Laviska Shenault,
sure.
In terms of build.
Right.
I think he's farther along as a receiver than Laviska was. But this is a good year, I think, in those day 2, even early day 3 to get a complimentary wideout.
I know fans hearing this are going to want more from Matt Miller. They can watch you on ESPN to get that, right?
They can, yeah, or check out articles on ESPN.com. We'll be putting those out. Feels like every day between now and the draft there will be something.
Great job as always. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you,
buddy.